did that.
Oh, that's
John and me.
right. That's right. Then I just when he was
That's when I
young.
was teaching in New York.
Yeah.
Food and Maritime trades. Okay, we're ready now.
That's good stuff. We're here with Noble Masi and Fritz Sonnenschmidt to talk about some of the history of their lives, but also some of the history of the culinary business. And we have certainly got some of the biggest names here, landmarks, benchmarks, no doubt. They're going to tell a story that could hopefully inspire some apprentices and young people and help to bring some warming to the hearts of people who are already fully involved or retired from the industry looking back at it. There's a lot of wisdom to be shared, and no question about it, the philosopher chef is becoming reinvented by these men. And so first of all, I'd like to just introduce Noble Masi. And Noble, if you could just give us a sense for what it was like when you were a very young man, like maybe some of your earliest memories of growing up in a business that was already pretty well developed and focused. And what was that like? What did that feel like?
Well, I was born in New York City at a time where we still had cobblestone streets and push carts delivering the vegetables. I was born to a family that immigrated from Italy. And my dad was a stonemason, and my older brother was a musician and got involved in the pastry business. He delivered ice around the city, and to the Swiss pastry shop he delivered ice, and then to make more money he went and cleaned pans and started to work in the Swiss pastry shop. So his career took a track towards baking. My dad stayed on in as a stonemason, and I lived not far from LaGuardia Airport. Would go up on the roof and watch DC-3s coming in, and I wanted to be a pilot. So I talked to my dad about being a pilot, and he just said, "Who's to pay you go to the college?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, you figured it out, and you're letting me know, and now you go to work with your brother." So I said, "Well, Dad, what about stonemason?" So he took me to New York, and he said, "Look, in 10 years they'll be building these buildings with slabs of concrete and glass and steel, and the bricklayers will then be doing stoops. So you go to work with your brother in the bakery." My brother's career was interrupted with World War II, but when he came back from the World War II, he opened up a bakery in Astoria, Queens. And I was 9 years old at the time, and I would go to the bakery after school. In New York you could walk around. The bakery's on 32nd Street. We lived on 27th Street, so there's no transportation involved. You just walked over to the bakery. And first started out just delivering to the local apartment houses, and then started to clean sheet pans, peel apples, set the tools out for the night baker that came in. And I saw that everybody seemed to be enjoying their work in the bake shop. It seemed to be hard, it were long hours, but there seemed to be a sense of satisfaction out of producing a quality bread or a quality cake. And everything was always around festive occasions. We made birthday cakes, we made sweet 16 cakes, and we made wedding cakes. It seemed like something that I would enjoy. So after I went to junior high school, I enrolled at Maritime Trades High School in New York City. New York City had many high schools, and we had food trades, and we had central needle trades, and because it was a big city, unlike the BOCES programs here, the schools were freestanding for each career. At food trades, I met a gentleman, Bill William Sultan, who later on became my mentor. And I originally went back to teach at Maritime Trades High School. In my first year at Maritime Trades, I went with school with Wally Amos, the famous chocolate chip guy. The first day we had a little confrontation, but then after that we settled down to be good friends, and I later on invited him to speak at some of our meetings. Food trades was very interesting. It gave me a solid foundation. It also gave me the opportunity to expand, because not only did they teach baking, they had culinary arts and they had butchering. So when I finished my baking class, I would go to the butcher shop and learn to butcher. New York City at that time was composed of a lot of small retail bakeries, butcher shops, grocery stores, produce stores. Everybody went shopping every day for their bread and their pastries on Sunday. Everybody went to the vegetable store every day to buy whatever they needed. Refrigeration was very, very small. Matter of fact,
Was it electric or ice?
we still had ice in my younger years. And when we'd go to Hunter, we had a refrigerator with that was with ice. And of course, I mentioned my brother delivered ice. It was one of his occupations at the time.
So keeping food cold was a challenge, I imagine.
Yeah, the household was centered around food. We lived in a coal flat. I never remember being cold. With a lot of love in the house, and we had always had a great dinner at night. Everybody had to sit at the table at dinner time, and we couldn't leave until my dad finished his dessert, which most of the time was just a piece of fresh fruit, unless my brother brought something home from the bakery. So with that background and the love of food, and my brother opening up a bakery, I decided that I would try this. I asked my brother, who had worked at the Plaza with Joe Tarantino. Joe is a good friend of Fritz's and taught Fritz how to make tomato sauce, which
My mentor.
may or may not explain later on.
Cross ships that pass in the night.
Joe Tarantino let me get into the Plaza. At that time, New York City hotels were dominated by European trained chefs. So the fact that I could speak Italian and that my brother was born in Italy kind of opened up the door at the Plaza for me. At the Plaza, there was a chef, Joseph Schiess, who later on went up to teach at the Culinary Institute in New Haven, Connecticut. And was also part of my career going into education, but I want to stay with the trade itself and the joys that it brought me. We opened up a second bakery in the Celtic Gardens in Sunnyside, Queens, for my brother Al. And then he got drafted for the Korean War. So we were with two bakeries, and Al had to go to the Korean War, and I guess the family plan might have been to open up a third one for me. But I felt that just working at the two bakeries limited my exposure, so I decided to leave the bakery temporarily and go to work at a supermarket that was the first supermarket bakery in New York City, called the Big Apple.
Hmm. Is it a large affair?
Yeah, we did. Country Kitchens gave us the dough and the cake layers, and we baked off in the supermarket. That was the first one. I then started to deal with other people. Got married and decided to. My wife's parents had a place in Florida, so I went down to Florida to work in Florida for 2 seasons. And I would work in Florida, and then I would go to work upstate New York in Lake George at Point of Pines. I did that for about 8 years, and then I visited the food maritime trades, and Bill Sultan invited me to take the exam to teach food trades at the Food Maritime Trades High School, which I did for 2 years. And then on a visit to the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park, Joe Sheese and Paul Spittler, who was the chairman of the board, invited me for a position. So I think as I reflect on the career, there was a lot of joy each time there was a celebration. In the New York City, when you delivered a wedding cake, you could get $25 to cut the wedding cake on the dance floor. So we would deliver the wedding cakes, and then we would put on a suit, and then we would go out and we would cut the wedding cake and serve it. And so it was everything around baking seemed to be festive. It seemed to bring joy to people. It seemed to be a challenge to be able to take a handful of ingredients and put them together and form a new product. I always tell people the difference between cooking and baking is that cooking, you have a product, you have carrots and you have chickens and you have poultry, and you apply a principle of heat to cook the product and bring out its flavor. In baking, a loaf of bread doesn't grow on a tree, so you have to take the grains and the water and natural fermentation and get the loaf of bread. I think that brings a lot of joy. I think growing up at a time when we were still making our own wine and preserving our own foods in the summertime. We had a root cellar for the root vegetables. We canned the tomatoes. We made pickled peppers.
What did you make wine from?
We used a Zinfandel Elegant blend. We
Good
made
wine.
200 gallons a year.
Wow.
And at that time, you could make 50 gallons for every person over 18 in the household.
Legal
my-
limit.
Yeah, my 2 brothers and my mother and father each were entitled to 50, so we made 200. Sometimes snuck in another 50, but
The revenuers didn't come?
and, we'd go down to the railroad yard and get the grapes,
Under the
and we
table.
cleaned them.
Did you have a press, or how'd you
We
make that?
took the stems off, and we ground them,
Mm-hmm.
and then they fermented outside. We always did it in October. When the must started to fall, that meant that the fermentation of the first stage was completed. So then we took the juice out, put it in a barrel, pressed the rest of the grape juice, put that in the barrel. And you had to keep the barrel full so that the impurities could boil over the top of the barrel. And so my job was to, because my dad was working and my brothers were working, was to make sure after school every day that I top off the barrel, because as it evaporated, it was, there's about a 3/4 inch lip there that you have to keep it so it boils out. And
when you say boil, that's the bacterial boil?
yeah, that's the
ferment. Yeah.
ferment coming up over the top. You
The
don't want
foam
to
rises.
put it back in, otherwise it comes foamy. And
So you must have had to clean up the foam too as it came out, and must have been a cleaning involved besides refilling.
yeah, well, there was a lot of cleaning.
Must have smelled like fermentation was going on.
His
down there.
sister did
We
it.
used no sulfates in the wine. We would take the barrels, a half a dozen lemons, and we would rub the lemons around the inside of the barrel to clean it, rinse it out,
Nice.
rub the lemons around, lift it out. I think there was more, in the era that I grew up, more of a respect for food. Utilization was always a key. The family meal was always a very important part of how you exchanged the day's happenings, you exchanged the news. You know, the older people talked about politics, we talked about sports, and we had a radio, we could listen to the Friday night fights, and your imagination was put to use.
Now, when you say family meal, was that the meal you had at home, or the meal that everyone would have at the bakery?
In the bakery, we always had a lunch meal, and we all sat around on the flour barrels, and then we would make some type of a pizza or grilled cheese or something in the oven, and then we sat down for a half hour to eat. You mentioned a story that I wanted to tell about going to Fruit Trades High School and beginning to work in the bakery. The baker that we had would not share the formulas. And when I went to school and I came in and I told him that we had to scale and measure everything, he said, well, you're not a baker if you have to scale and measure everything. He says, I don't use a scale. But what he would do is he had his little bucket by the mixing machine, like a 5-gallon bucket. And I observed that he would fill that bucket up a certain level with water, a certain amount of times with flour. He had a certain line he put the salt in. And when he came to something critical that he didn't want me to see, he sent me to pick up a bag of flour. The flour was in 100-pound bags at that time. And one of the achievements was you go into this trade is to be able to pick up that 100-pound bag of flour and bring it into the shop.
And empty it, I imagine, without getting it all over the floor.
And so one day I took the bucket and I hid it, and he came to work and he said, where's that bucket? And I said, I threw it out, and he had a little bit of a hemorrhage. I said, you needed that bucket? I said, well, you don't need a scale or anything, here's another bucket. I had another one, a different size. So he really made a lot of noise, and I told him I didn't throw it out. I said, but stop laughing at me because I scale everything, because that's the way I've been taught to do it at school. There's always, you know, when you go to school and learn something, as opposed to apprenticeship, and then people that go through apprenticeship don't think that the schools are doing their job. they'll